Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Employee Networks, Getting More Work Done Through Shared Experience, sponsored by Pandexio and presented by Lacey Lowe, Bob Dana, John Burge, and Bob Sachs. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that this webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI credit and can also be used for SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. After the webcast, you'll receive an email from HR.com within 1 to 2 business days that will include your certification information. You can also log into HR.com and go to your View My Credits page where you can see the credits that you've received. If you have any questions today for our presenters or for HR.com, please type them into your questions tab on your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll be sure to follow up with you. You'll also find today's presentation slides in PDF form in the handout section of your control panel, so please feel free to download those. And it is my pleasure now to turn you over to Pandexio.
Great, thank you so much, Sylvie. Hello, everyone. This is Lacey Lowe. Thank you for joining today's conversation on the second of 5 megatrends shaping the workforce of the future. Today's discussion, the new organizational structure oriented around knowledge-powered networks of experts. In July, this group began the conversation and discussed new worker capabilities required of the workforce of the future because of the arrival of smart systems and artificial intelligence and robots. Over the next 6 months, we will hold the next 3 parts of this conversation. In November, we'll explore the new expectations of your workers regarding the need to be a subject matter expert and how they're going to go about spreading their actionable wisdom across the employee network that we're talking about today. In January, we will share with you the results of our field survey that's out right now. It's called Preparing for the Workforce 2020 and Beyond and Implications for Action. And finally, in March, we'll wrap up with a discussion of new speed and new metrics, the expectation for our employees to make smarter decisions faster in our digital world, and new ways to measure their contributions to business goals and to stay relevant in their future workforce. During the next 60 minutes that we share together today, the 4 of us seek to offer to you actionable knowledge in at least 6 key areas: organizational structures and the challenges and benefits of each, transformation of yesterday's traditional structure into today's networked model, the critical role of your employees as experts in a networked model, and frankly, how to identify who those experts are, how to leverage the experts after you identify them and enable them to share their insights across the employee network, to expose you to organizations who are already deploying a network structure and talk about the value it's bringing to them. And finally, learning how to get started and sustain a network model so that your employees can make better decisions faster. Following today's conversation, we will provide each of you with a copy of the slides we talked to, a link for playback of the conversation we have today, our email addresses, should you have questions that we run out of time to answer, and an opportunity to request a no-charge consultation with one or more of the thought leaders speaking with you today. We will also include a link to that survey that's closing up this week, and we want your participation if you have time to cast your vote. So let's jump into today's conversation. Organizational structure is the method by which work flows through an organization. It allows groups to work together within, between, and among their individual functions to manage tasks, to get their work done, and to meet changing business goals. Of course, it should encourage the acquisition, the engagement, and the retention of your top talent. So let's explore organizational structure. An organizational structure is optimized when it maximizes communication throughout the enterprise, the Y-axis, and leverages all experts, all resource experts at all levels and all functions. Organizational structure has evolved through what I'll call 3 phases: what was, what is today, and what is working. We are all familiar with the traditional hierarchical models that prompt predictability, but typically sacrifice effective communication or inefficient use of resources, or both. In fact, only 14% of executives believe that a hierarchical structure makes their organization effective. So to improve upon that effectiveness, many of those organizations have transitioned to a matrix structure, pretty much what we see in many organizations today. But the matrix structure, it too comes with challenges and shortcomings, particularly in the area of inconsistent communication across the enterprise. So it's really not too much of a surprise that we are starting to see some top-performing organizations shift yet a third time to a flattened and a network structure, a structure that builds in consistent communications enterprise-wide and exposes talent everywhere in the organization. Bob, I was wondering, could you please talk to us a bit about how a flattened network structure operates in practice and just how it facilitates effective enterprise communications and effective utilization of all resources?
Great, yes, thanks, Lacey. Before I get started in that, I just want to remind everyone from our last webcast, we addressed several megatrends that are important in this regard. The multi-generational workforce has significant expertise in every generation at all levels in the hierarchical organization. Many new enterprise communications tools have been introduced that permit virtual interaction among everyone, anywhere they are. And in fact, as we start to think about the global flattened network, there's a number of different benefits that we're starting to see. First, you have multiple experts located in multiple locations at multiple levels within a hierarchical organization, whether it's divisional, functional, or matrix, and being able to access those individuals and have them as either topical or thought leader level subject matter experts be able to provide their expertise to the organization. In addition, as we start to get to that flattened and networked organization, there is a higher degree of consistent communication that you see from an advantage standpoint as we start to move towards that structure. We can share insights more seamlessly, collaborate on decision making, and have the power of the collective intelligence of the organization, not just what's in a division or in a functional organization or even within the matrix structure. Additionally, we see substantial enhancement of productivity and then a significant elimination of information overload. So as organizations make this transition and push forward a more flexible, team-centric network model, they find that smaller teams are a natural way for humans to work. Whatever the hierarchical organizational chart says, real day-to-day work gets done in networks. This is why the organization of the future is an enterprise network.
So Bob, in reflecting on your comments and insights about a network structure, and in thinking about those 14% of executives who said traditional structures are ineffective, I'm curious as to how many of those listening along with us align with this thinking and with this research. Do they too think that redesigning an organizational structure that they have in place today is really super vital for the workforce of the future? So to that point, Sylvie, can you open our first poll for us? Give me the high sign when you have it open. And here's the question that I was hoping that our listeners could answer for us. To prepare for the future, do you think it is important to redesign the current structure of your organization? Yes, no, not sure. I'll give you a minute or two here to cast your vote. Looks like we've got most of the folks responding, and as you continue to kind of throw your vote in the hat here, I'm looking at about 60% yes, 10% no, and 31% not sure. And so, you know, that fairly well aligns with the research that I wanted to show you here. The mixed poll results is typical with the propensity towards yes. the sheer assortment of responses points out an early finding of our current in-field study, results for which you see on the left-hand side of this screen, where if you look at the bottom two rows, almost 46% of survey respondents said that they have made no or only slight progress in building a workforce capable of meeting 2020 business goals because of their current structure. Add that piece of data to the data that you see on the right, which is from the Deloitte 2016 and 17 Human Capital Trends Reports, and that says that on average, 90% of organizations in all parts of the world rate organization redesign as very important or important to meeting business goals. So for the 60% who said, you know, yes, in fact, we do think it's important, you have a lot of company across the globe. So I'm trying to move us on to the next slide here to give you some more data. Despite the fact that more, than 4 in 5 organizations see outsized benefits from shifting that organizational structure from a traditional hierarchy to a network, only 1 in 5 are actually fully networked. So when asked, hey, why haven't you made the shift yet? The answer is straightforward. It's pretty much lack of know-how, and understandably so. Organizational structure change is not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. In fact, only 11% of survey respondents said they understand how to approach the redesign and the building of a network organization. And to help themselves, get started, they sought to learn more about the benefits of doing so, really more information about what it looked like in action, and how to leverage technology to enable their employees to operate in such a network. So understanding the benefit an organization can expect to reap from such a transformation and what the new structure looks like, perhaps near term, midterm, long term, that might make good sense for organizations to understand before they dive in on a full transformation effort. So Bob, other than the sort of X and Y axes that we looked at on the 2x2 grid, which were, hey, a network gives us more effective communications, and hey, a network allows us to more quickly identify experts across the enterprise. Are there other benefits to a network model that organizations might be interested in knowing about?
Yeah, for sure, Lacey. And in fact, a number of organizations have been studying this for probably the past 5 or 6 years. This is some information from Deloitte on network thinking. About 5 years ago, we've seen consistent updates of this. But as you're starting to think about the business case, which is really what we're speaking about right now, to move from a hierarchical structure to a network structure, here's a number of different elements in terms of a comparison of impact of moving towards that network structure. So as you move from a controlled focus to an adaptable focus, which is where we need to be at this point from an agility standpoint. So it allows easier change, it's more responsive, it's less bureaucratic, and like I said, it's more agile. Move from inflexibility in terms of that hierarchical structure, and whether or not we think we're flexible or not, in many cases, the siloing, the structuring within the hierarchical organization inhibits a lot of that innovation. And so this encourages insight sharing when we move towards that network model. Move from rigidity to resilience, and actually support the teaming and strengthening that teaming structure. We move towards a more contributory structure in terms of a relevance attributed to the contributions and not just a position in the hierarchical organization. And then finally, from adherence to compliance to a diversity of thought and experience, encourages challenging the status quo and moving towards a much more thoughtful and reasoned approach to business outcomes.
So thanks, Bob. It seems as if the benefits are entirely clear, at least more than a handful, and really begin to align with what we talk about, the need for organizations to be agile, innovative, and flexible. But regardless, to move from a hierarchy to a network is a real hurdle. And certainly, as we saw from some of those data points, some are questioning the effort investment versus the business benefit ratio. So again, perhaps that's why while so many recognize the need to do so, few have actually done so already, even though it is a critical business need going forward. Can you say a bit more about what you have seen in your client organizations working with those from Deloitte, about what a normal course of transition would look like? Talk to us about that, if you could.
Yeah, and Lacey, actually, the transition to the network model does not imply that we're going to abandon the team or teams of teams, but in fact, this is not a transition. It is, in fact, kind of more of a evolution of thinking about the organizational structure. So before, we were talking about the hierarchical structure that many organizations see from a divisional, functional, or matrix standpoint. But we're operating in teams, and now operating more often in teams of teams. And the enterprise network structure actually encourages that. So as we're thinking about this, and this diagram illustrates one very, very important thing, and that is the tapping of the subject matter expert. As we're moving from the last webinar, we spoke about the role of the subject matter expert in the future of work. But you can notice here within the project, we see project leads, subject matter experts from a topical level, subject matter experts from a thought leader level. As I move towards more of a team of teams, and we'll speak about this a little bit further in the next several slides, we start to look at a number of different individuals at both the topical and thought leader level across a number of different network teams. And then finally, and more importantly, as we get to the network, we start to uncover a number of subject matter experts that we probably didn't even know existed within the organization that now become apparent and contributing both from a thought leader standpoint and from a topical standpoint.
So the centerpiece, it seems then, Bob, of high-performing networks of experts, whether it's project teams, teams of teams, or the full enterprise network, are really experts, topical level SMEs and thought leaders, those who distill meaningful and actionable ideas from all the information we read. When I look at the slide that you had up as you were speaking, it looks as if the number of experts typically starts with a handful of individuals, kind of on the left-hand side in project teams. But for the greatest business differentiation and the greatest impact of teams and networks, it needs to evolve to as many workers as possible within organizations being subject matter experts, being insights experts, and making meaningful contributions to the business to ensure that they're meeting business goals and they stay relevant to their organization. So Bob, I need a little more clarification on the role of the SME in this network model, and specifically across sort of those three flavors: the project team, the teams of teams, and the enterprise network. What is the role of the SME in these network types?
Yeah, and actually, before we address the role, what I'd like to do is just mention the fact that we've already started pulling some preliminary data from your responses to the HR.com survey that we and HR.com are collaborating on. And you can see on the bottom here is some very recent data. Almost 1,000 of you have responded. And 73% of the respondents said that to compare to today, by 2020, to a greater or a much greater extent, employees will need to be subject matter experts. So this is not something that's pretty much out for debate, and actually this is you speaking based on filling out the responses to this survey. Now, from the SME standpoint, in a project and program teams, SMEs, fewer in number, network and collaborate within the team to which they are working, and often are experts on topic or initiative on which the team is working. In teams and teams of teams, that model The number of SMEs are plentiful. This is across a number of different organizations, a number of different functions, often in the hundreds. Network and collaborate across multiple teams and have expertise in several topics, functions, and areas. In an enterprise network model, the workforce is almost wholly comprised of experts who are fully networked and collaborate both inside and outside of the global enterprise with expertise in many, many areas of the business.
Great. Thanks, Bob, for distilling that for us. John, are your experiences with experts in networks similar to what Bob describes when you think about the work with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely, Lacey. And I think what we're going to see as we make this transition is the traditional question of for whom do you work is going to be replaced by with whom do you work. And similarly, the question of what is your area of specialty is going to be replaced by how many areas of the business are you an expert in? How has that grown from last year? How are you sharing that knowledge, your knowledge, with your networks and across the enterprise?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. I agree, and that's big because we're used to having specialists in functional areas, and it's going to take an effort to help folks become expert, become thought leaders in areas more than to which they typically have just an assigned job role. So, Bob and John, understanding the role of subject matter experts in a flat network, that's to me, that's the easy part. Okay, got it. We need experts in the network. How does an organization go about identifying who the experts are in their organization when they're in a networked model?
Yeah, Lacey, in fact, building an enterprise network model guided by literally hundreds of SMEs doesn't happen simply by saying we no longer have a traditional hierarchical model of an organizational structure. It requires a planful approach and a commitment to execution of the transformation. This is why so many, 89% in fact, haven't yet made the shift. To help organizations, many new processes and techniques offer valuable contributions to building the organization of the future. One promising technique is organizational network analysis, which uses specialized software and methodologies to help organizations study who is talking to whom. This type of analysis, which use patterns in emails, instant messages, physical proximity, and other data, allow leaders to quickly see that the network are in place and identify the subject matter experts and connections to those experts.
So thanks, Bob. Organizational network analysis, that is definitely ONA, a new tool coined by Rob Cross, for those who are familiar with Rob Cross from Babson College. John, can you describe how ONA is working to identify SMEs in this new product team network example that we have showing here? How do we know that Lee, Paul, and Helen are the experts in this product team?
So the diagram shows information flow and knowledge sharing within that kind of new product development team. Now, manual surveys were used to generate the data. Each member of the team was essentially asked, who do you turn to for information to get your work done? And what we did was then the network has then been color-coded to differentiate between team members in marketing, product development, and manufacturing. And note that there are 3 types of experts that have been identified and mapped here using ONA. If you see the big circle on the left, the one that says Lee, and then the big yellow circle on the right, Helen, they were both identified by ONA as experts who serve as what we call central connectors for their domain. Lee is the marketing expert, Helen's the manufacturing expert, and they are both key to the functioning of their domain areas. They are definitely people you do not want to lose. For the second, and really the most crucial type, in the center there, you will note Paul from product. He's shown as the green circle with red and yellow around the edges. Not only is Paul what we call a central connector expert within his own domain, that's the green circle part, the product development part, he's also what we call a knowledge broker who has sufficient domain knowledge of both marketing and manufacturing. That's the coloring on the edges in red and yellow Paul can, speak their language, if you will. We do not want to lose Paul. I mean, if we did, marketing and manufacturing may not even be able to communicate with each other. These multi-domain experts are crucial to competing in the future, and we need to be able to find them, nurture them, and create more of them. For the third type, the smaller colored circles, O&A has identified peripheral experts who oftentimes represent untapped expertise and underutilized knowledge and resources for the group. Now, three things you may already be seeing with this type of analysis. One, it is crucial to understanding how these networks function. It's an essential input. This analysis is an essential input to structuring teams and making staffing and recruiting decisions. Two, we need to find more automated real-time ways to perform this analysis, and we want it to be as accurate as possible, as the current solutions rely heavily on surveys and analysis of email communication patterns. And three, we need to find better ways to curate knowledge than the current as is, which essentially is brain cells and whole documents. These networks need to be agile and dynamic, and the more we are reliant on what's between people's ears or stored in documents, the more rigid and fragile they are.
Yeah, so thanks, John. I can clearly see then the example of Paul, who's expert in product marketing, his own function, or product development, as well as marketing and manufacturing that are sort of owned by Lee and Helen. That is definitely a case for showing the criticality of subject matter expertise in more than one area. Thanks for that explanation. So, John, according to Deloitte's 2017 Human Capital Trends Survey, only 8% of organizations are using O&A today, but the usage is growing rapidly with an additional 48%, meaning more than half of organizations today are beginning to experiment with this tool to identify experts as they begin to move to, a networked model from either a traditional model or a matrix model. In fact, many of those organizations are marquee logos that you see listed here: 3M, IBM, GE, Nestle, Cleveland Clinic, even the U.S. Army, among others, are using some form of O&A already to identify experts within teams, as John described, and across the employee network. So as entities transition from, a command and control, hierarchy or a matrix organization to an agile network, in speaking with with leadership from these organizations here, we distilled sort of a handful or more of silver threads common among all of them. Among these logos, they are taking effort to decentralize, authority. They're taking effort to empower teams and networks of teams. They're acknowledging that information, that content that comes at us 24/7 is fundamental, but not enough to make informed business decisions at the moment of need. They're taking effort to use a tool like O&A or O&A to identify experts, dispelling the notion that experts only exist at the senior leadership levels and ranks. And they're enabling sharing of experts' insights through the use of a new technology tool. And then ultimately, as we're all familiar with, they're making effort to hold teams of experts accountable for results and recognize and reward them for their contribution. So beyond the logos that we see here, we have one more real-life example of a successful transition to a network of teams to share with you today. It comes from Bob Sachs, recently retired Vice President, National Learning and Development at Kaiser Permanente. Bob, thanks for joining us today. Can you talk to us a bit about who Kaiser is, how they are using a networked model, and the so what? In other words, what difference does the networked approach really make for the business at Kaiser? And was the transformation effort that you all went through worth that effort?
Thanks very much, Lacey. Let me start off by setting some context about Kaiser and how that nature of Kaiser led to the high use of teams that we're going to be talking about. For those of you who are not familiar, Kaiser is a large, not-for-profit, integrated health system. It's been around since 1945. It's large. It serves over 11 million members, has $65 billion in revenues, and has over 200,000 employees, and that doesn't include the 20,000 physicians that work closely with it. Kaiser is also highly distributed. It's in 8 states and the District of Columbia. there are 39 medical centers and 677 medical offices that house these 200,000 employees. And I think the important thing for what we're going to be talking about here is that a significant number of those employees, well over 100,000 of them, are represented by labor unions, and of those, the vast majority are part of what is a labor management partnership that actually began at Kaiser starting back in 1997. And it really was, and the reason it started was Kaiser and the unions had a choice. They were going to fight about issues around cost and quality, or they were going to find ways to work together. And thankfully, they chose the option to begin to work together, and they created a labor management partnership that still goes on and actually fostered the beginning of these teams, of which today there are well over 3,500 teams operating across this large network of medical centers and medical offices. So that's kind of a bit about Kaiser and why they use teams. Let's talk a bit about how these teams actually operate. So first of all, you see the term unit-based teams. All the teams that we're talking about here are based in work units. So they're on the floor in the medical centers, in the medical offices, in the customer service centers, etc. And these teams consist of the frontline employees. They are considered the experts in their work, and they are looked to try to find ways to continue to improve that work with the support of what Kaiser calls co-leads, which is actually a formal management person, but then also a union member. And those two individuals work together to support the work of the team as they try to make for a better experience for Kaiser's members and its patients. And in fact, these teams are highly accountable. They are accountable for improving performance, and they're accountable for doing that consistent with the value compass that you can see here. So the focus is always on how do we create something better for our patients and our members, and better is really defined as the things that you can see around the compass. How do we make sure that our patients are receiving the best quality, that our members are getting the most affordable health care, that both are getting the best service that we possibly can give them, and how do we make sure that our employees are operating in an environment that enables all of that. And the teams spend time trying to come up with ways of improving performance against that value compass. All of this is supported by a group of sponsors who actually sit above the team, again, labor and management sponsors. And these are the folks who will continually review the progress of the teams against some of the metrics that the value compass reflects. They'll recognize progress. They'll try to remove barriers. They'll secure resources when that's appropriate. And they help promote the use of the different performance improvement tools that are available for the teams to utilize in trying to identify and then implement improvements. And these teams over the years have been quite successful. Just to give you a sense of a few of them, one team in behavioral health saved over $1 million in the first year by educating patients on how to make the appropriate use of the emergency room. They were seeing too much overuse, and they were able to do a better job of helping patients understand when the emergency room was the right place to go and what to do prior to that. A team in pharmacy, again, over $1 million in less than a year by moving to more bulk purchasing and just-in-time purchasing. Again, these are improvements that the teams identified and then implemented. And then finally, a materials management team improved workplace safety by involving the whole team in prevention strategies like daily stretching and other kinds of exercises. And in general, these high-performing teams that we see across the organization actually demonstrated fewer workplace injuries and fewer less workdays, so more productivity and, in essence, a better place to work. So you can see that Kaiser's been able to get a lot of the benefits that we've heard earlier in terms of creativity, strengthened teaming, great opportunity to contribute. As a matter of fact, at Kaiser, they talk about how the teams have really democratized the workplace. That's a big term that you hear around the organization. So it clearly has been of great benefit, and it's been a lot of work. And what you see here are some of the things that really have led to the success of the team. So let me just kind of quickly walk through some of that. First of all, they establish something called the path to performance, which really is a sense of how teams mature, that teams can then look at and assess their progression on that maturity level. And in fact, the organization sets goals for how many level 4 and level 5 teams, which are the highest levels on the path to performance, it wants to be able to see, and how do you move from 50% high-performing teams to 60 and 70 and 80. And so there are goals that are set and that everybody works toward. There is significant training that is provided around this, both to the co-leads on helping them learn how to work together, to the teams in terms of, first of all, business literacy, understanding the business that they're operating in, understanding the path for performance, and probably most importantly, performance improvement tools, particularly things like a rapid improvement model, PDSA kinds of things that allow the teams to begin to identify and then create potential improvements. They're given the time to huddle, to be able to have the time to meet. There are actually consultants who float around the organization who are there to help the teams either resolve issues that they're having in terms of their effectiveness, but also in applying some of the tools that they have available to them. There are scorecards that everybody looks at in terms of goals and ability to achieve higher levels of performance relative to the past performance. There's a performance sharing plan in place that has goals at multiple levels that the teams are able to participate in, so they in fact do get something in their paycheck as they achieve certain outcomes. And there's the sponsorship that happens within the organization, and that really is important. The most successful teams are the ones that have the most sponsorship. So this accountability and support together really is important in making these teams successful. It's a lot of effort. It's still going on. It continues to get better. And fundamentally, the question is it worth it? And if you look at the next slide, you can see at least one person's perspective on that. It happens to be the current chairman and CEO of Kaiser. And you can read his quote. But basically, what Bernard is saying here is that he views these teams as a great source of competitive advantage in terms of improving all the dimensions that Kaiser thinks is really important. And that's why Bernard and the organization continues to support this structure and this process of improvement and the unit-based teams.
Thank you so much, Bob. Now that's what I'm talking about. That is a classic example of, we open up this discussion by saying, there's a mega trend around a movement from a traditional hierarchy to an enterprise network of teams with measurable business results. Holy mackerel. Those are some business metrics that would cause anybody to sit up and pay attention. Clearly, subject matter experts, teams, O&A are central to moving from hierarchies to networks like the examples we gave, but the one that Bob Sachs just shared. Bob Dana, can I come back to you for a minute in regards to Bob Sachs gave some really quantifiable results that happened at Kaiser. Are you seeing any quantifiable business value around O&A and enterprise networks in the organizations that you've been working with most recently at Deloitte?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, finding and then pairing individuals between subject matter experts and the others in the network have absolutely measurable impact. And in fact, Northwestern University, Harvard, McKinsey, all have been seeing this over a number of years. And in fact, in traditional workforces, sitting next to the expert meant literally that. So how do we now start to think about applying this concept to the new world of work? The new world, the new work architectures. In fact, how do we do this virtually? How do we do it to scale? How do we do it faster? We must use technology to achieve this in the modern network structure.
Yeah, so I got it. Moving to a network makes a measurable impact on the business. Now, what always happens when we're working with clients is, sounds great. How do we support and sustain a model? So can we talk about some of the key practices as it relates to that? I suspect an organizational model transformation of the size of this, moving from a hierarchy to a network, has several implications on how organizations approach learning, knowledge management, and performance support. Bob, talk to us about what you've seen organizations, what you've seen in organizations here. Again, how does Deloitte help clients think differently about learning, about knowledge, about performance support in this new network structure?
Yeah, let's start with learning. And in fact, this is various elements of a business case. We call it old rules, new rules. But in fact, is what many organizations are still doing today compared to what they'll see from a value standpoint as they start to move to a new set of rules associated with knowledge building in the network structure. So we see, in essence, still a number of organizations developing learning content. And in fact, what we need is to have the corporate L&D, the business units, the learners, all play a role in curating learning content, yes, table stakes, and learners curate and share the insights they form from that content. That's the new idea, the new rule. Right now, we're still focused on that 10%. Everyone's familiar with the 70, 2010 Institute and the various elements of that. We're still focused on that, investing in that 10%. We absolutely have to move now to employees learning all of the time from each other, and particularly from those topical and thought leader SMEs, the experts with the insights to share. That's the 70-20. We've got to be able to crack that nut and move towards that. The LMS and newer content curation and sharing tools are in place right now in most organizations. But we really need to have now an insight curation and sharing tool that is starting to capture the insights, the wisdom of individuals, and be able to formalize that in that 70-20%, and then be able to share that across the enterprise. And then finally, we need to be able to have content accessible not only from a learning management system, but also those insights flowing freely within existing daily use systems, the workflow, integrated with everything that's going on, and at the fingertips, at the pocket brains, the smartphones, the various handheld devices that individuals are now using in the workforce.
Thanks, Bob. John, can you illustrate what Bob's talking about here? What the new learning requirements are for organizations to successfully adapt to the network structure? What are your sort of expert insights in this area?
Sure, Lacey. Kind of going back to our diagram here, starting with our goals for creating a healthy product team that functions well and has staying power. One of the goals is to get as many employees simply showing up as dots in the first place. If you saw our last webinar on cognitive systems and automation, if you don't show up as a dot on the O&A analysis, you may not add sufficient value to warrant a future payroll slot. And everything we see points to the need for everyone to become an expert. Another goal is to create as many Helens, Lees, and particularly Pauls as we can and nurture them. These are the key players that companies need to function effectively under network structures. Another goal is to shift knowledge from individuals to organizations. These networks are highly dynamic, and we need them to be, or a company can't optimize their use of knowledge resources. And we have to address that institutional knowledge problem. It can't, reside in between people's ears or documents. And kind of given these requirements, we recommend viewing this more from the standpoint of organizational learning and network information access structures. We just think it's a better framework than the traditional focus on corporate learning direction. And we've kind of laid out what that looks like here shown in this table. And another way to think about this is MIT's Sloan School of Business performed a study on how organizations can network or increase their stored knowledge by what they called grafting onto experts. And in the old days, this was sitting next to them and working alongside them. Well, now we're at a time and in a place where we must now do this virtually. We must do it at scale. And curated insights are the closest, virtual equivalent, if you will, of sitting next to an expert or grafting onto them, to use MIT's terminology.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, John. Good example. So I got it how learning needs to sort of transform then in the new network. Bob, what about new skills? a networked enterprise model not only impacts changes to organizational learning practices, but I would imagine influences new requisite skills for both leaders and employees. How are leader and employee skills different in a networked model versus a hierarchical model? Again, what do the competency models, look like in networked organizations for those folks you're working with that are the early adopters of this transition?
Yeah, in fact, this is not only associated with skills, but in fact, in many cases, is a cultural change. So I'm just going to hit on a couple of those. For managers, we really have to empower connection, don't control. Stimulate employees to keep contributing to the network, and spotlight the valuable contributions to the network and reward people openly for helping and including others in their knowledge sharing networks. Those are key elements, in many cases, a cultural change. The same thing on the employee side. They have to be encouraged and rewarded, recognized for their contribution to the network. They have to be recognized and rewarded to stay connected, and they have to be recognized and rewarded to share their wisdom and insight.
Great, thanks, Bob. So in today's digital world, talent and business practices are inseparable from technology and getting more so. So we started to talk a little bit about, the LMS, the TMS, content curation tools that exist today. Are they enough to support, the network of experts curating and sharing insights? Talk to us a little bit about the data point here, Bob.
Yeah, and in fact, this is a McKinsey study, and the focus in terms of the top 5 outcomes of using new knowledge sharing tools, it's substantial. It in fact increases the speed to access the knowledge, and it increases the speed to access the internal experts. So it's obvious that in both cases, what McKinsey is saying is you need the tools in order to achieve these elements, and the percent of companies right now using some sort of knowledge sharing tool is substantial. Now that could be Facebook's Workplace, Slack, Google Team Drives, Confluence, Microsoft Skype. Hundreds of these are now proliferating through the organization, and it's really important to kind of planfully and thoughtfully decide on what's going to make sense to actually maximize the impact across the enterprise network.
Thanks, Bob. So again, as the networks transform the business landscapes, we see successful organizations of the future thinking about these new types of knowledge sharing tools to move more fast, to adapt more quickly, to learn more rapidly, and to share experts' insights across the network. Sylvie, I'm up to another poll. I'm curious about the extent to which those with us today are already using some of these new types of knowledge tools. Not just about finding a document, but tools that help them distill key information from a document that might be on their desktop, that help them share the key information they find and to actually utilize that key information. Bob mentioned some tools. I've heard folks talking about tools like AnswerBase, Bloomfire, Covio, could be others. Anyways, the question is, folks, to prepare for the future, to what extent will new tools for experts to share insights be important? So yeah, I see results coming in, again, mixed. But yeah, to a great extent, more than half of you, and about looks like about 85% of you, either to a greater extent or some extent. So in fact, new insights curation tools will be an up-and-coming lever for the workforce of the future. And this is new technology that identifies the identification of experts and allows them to share. What you're looking at here is, again, some early insights from the survey that we have in the field that asks this very question. And you can see 29% of survey respondents said that by 2020, these new insights curation platforms will be important for helping, employees get their work done. I'm going to come back to technology in a minute. I just want to finish out this section on sustaining and nurturing the new type of network. And I'm curious about the aspect of beyond learning and skills, what new people and business practices might need to be put in place Bob, to help an organization beyond learning to make this transition to a network?
Yeah, I'm just going to pick out a couple of these. In fact, we cannot diminish the importance of rethinking our reward and recognition, because rewarding knowledge, rewarding sharing, rewarding the subject matter expert in the network, and then developing that individual starts to become a very, very important part of both the organization and leadership. To that matter, under leadership, that the shift of senior leaders into roles focused on cross-team communications and not just kind of functional management starts to become a very, very important part of the contribution to the business and talent practices, in many cases that most organizations do not have in place right now.
Great. And then, Bob, on metrics, as organizations make this shift and they become early adopters of experts sharing insights across the enterprise, are the metrics that they're collecting and sharing and reporting on, are they the same old ones that we always have?
Yeah, they might be the same old ones from a description standpoint. Tool utilization, we've heard that for probably 25 years. But really, right now, tool utilization is tool utilization by the subject matter experts, the topic level and thought leaders, by the executives and managers, and then by the members of the network and the teams that are actually utilizing the insights, the wisdom of others. When it comes to the quality of experience, leveraging of that wisdom, the insights, the experience of all generations, all disciplines, and then the integration with the workflows start to become a very, very important part of the experience. And then finally, the business impact starts to become very specific to the product launch, sales, contact center operations. Where do we actually see the impact on business outcomes? And it's not just talking generalities like enhanced productivity. It starts to become very specific about what the business outcome has been as we start to now implement this new line of thought.
Thanks, Bob. And so, clearly there are a number of levers that need to get pulled to shift from a hierarchy to a network. And we've talked about, some of the practices. We've talked about, some of the metrics. And we've given some examples of organizations that are doing it well and getting results. So, why should you really care about this? I'm going to say because we've given examples already that your workforce has already begun to do this, right? Particularly as our workforces get dominated more with millennials, they are used to working collaboratively and with teams. So they're there. We need the organizational structure to catch up. And, like always, there's a couple of keys to accelerating and unleashing the transformation to an enterprise network. And you can see, less than a handful here that's documented by Deloitte. And it's really all about thinking about those kind of three flavors, the project team, the teams of teams, and the network. And don't dive in with trying to transition to a network, but start with some teams that you might have some success in, like what happened at Kaiser Permanente, where they started with their unit-based teams. Think about how you're going to get those going, and then perhaps expand to the rest of the enterprise. And as you can see there with the fourth item, and what these organizations here have done, have clearly leveraged technology. So like always, technology is not the silver bullet. It won't be the answer, but it will definitely be the enabler. And there is the new type of technology, that we've been talking about, insights curation platforms that are absolutely essential for making this happen. John, can you describe these tools a little bit more and how organizations like Google, 3M, the Army, other ones that we've been talking about, how they're using these new insight curation platforms to boost the wisdom of networks of experts?
Sure, Lacey. First, some context. Let's contrast insight curation with content curation. Today's employees have no problem accessing content. They're flooded with web content, document systems, email attachments, nor do they have problems curating it. I mean, the typical employee has way more browser bookmarks and documents than they ever have time to refind and reread. And clinically speaking, we're probably all information hoarders, myself included. And so everybody struggles with this, and across every enterprise every day, and nobody solved this problem. And if we extrapolate the state, if you will, to what it takes for these new networks to succeed, essentially what we're saying is that before we introduce any other content sources or content curation systems or other places to store, sync, share documents, we need to address the fundamental issues associated with filtering and refining and rereading and forgetting and all that goes on with all of it. I mean, and this is where insight curation comes into play. Insight curation is about permanently capturing those nuggets and your interpretation, understanding of them. And that's what we call curated insights into one spot, one shared system, one cloud, if you will, for the organization. And this then allows everyone to work directly with needles instead of haystacks, or directly with the signal instead of the noise, and not have to constantly replicate each other's knowledge. If you go to the next slide there, this is a diagram of an insight curation platform. Now, note content curation systems are just one of many sources of content that employees may use to consume content, learn, and think as they go about doing their jobs. And we know that when employees consume content, the sparks fly, light bulbs go off, they learn stuff, form new ideas, and today it's all offline, inaccessible, and overwhelming. Well, the role of the insight curation platform is to tie all these systems together to sort of go to where the content lives, so to speak, and make it easy for employees to capture those thoughts formed while they're consuming this content at the time and place of formation, tie into browsers, document systems, social networks. And by doing that, we also get it all up into a centralized cloud so they can access it on their smartphone, which then truly can serve as their pocket brain. So I'm going to bring this to life a little bit by walking through some screenshots of an actual insight curation platform, the one we use. If you flip to the next slide, let's talk nuts and bolts of how insights get curated. Here's a web page that has been pulled into the system. In this case, a Deloitte document that Bob is consuming. Bob drew a box with his mouse around the actionable excerpt. Here was a paragraph, but it could be a chart or a graphic or a fact, whatever triggered those light bulbs in Bob's head. Bob then entered his insight and some tags, and it all went up into the cloud. Now, Bob doesn't have to worry about forgetting it. He doesn't have to worry about where to store it on his hard drive or ever having to go back and reread the document because he's already captured what he got out of it. And once it's in the cloud, Bob can then access his insights anytime, anywhere on any of his devices and can auto-share with his team or organization as he sees fit. And this slide kind of shows a picture of what that looks like when he wants to re-access insights later, which isn't inevitable because he doesn't have a photographic memory. He is presented a searchable index of all his insights. It's not documents. He's not digging around in folders looking for stuff to reread, but it's his insights directly, and not just his. It's those of all his colleagues. He can search, filter, select certain people or tags to browse their insights. And if he clicks on one of them, shown with that yellow arrow, it pops open, showing the picture on the right. That's the whole thing. It includes the actionable excerpt from the document, includes Bob's insight and tags. In the thumbnail in the upper right is the actual source document. If he clicks on that, it will relaunch that curated source and rotate it to the exact page and location of the excerpt. And by curating that source, all the insights have long-term business value. It enables them to be presented and shared with credibility. And one more kind of slide I want to share on that is, you asked about how Google and others could use insight curation as part of their shift to being network operating structures. Well, first, it would empower their people to become experts faster and retain that knowledge in the network, which we've covered pretty well. But the second relates to analyzing, managing these networks. As we discussed with O&A, that relies on manual surveys and email analysis to visualize what's going on. With an insight curation platform, here you can just sort of directly measure it. I mean, this is essentially a snapshot of Helen's brain. It's about as direct as you can to what they're capturing and sharing. So why don't you flip ahead to slide 42, skip one slide here. So, you're starting to see that leading experts in corporate learning are now getting involved in finding insight curation to sort of be the natural, logical next step in corporate learning, performance support, and knowledge management, and really sort of tying them all together, including organizations in professional services, healthcare, and technology sector who are in the process of implementing insight curation capabilities, including one of the big four. Back to you, Lacey. I think we may have lost Lacey here.
Got you. I think we're back. Thank you so much, John, Bob, and Bob, for sharing your experience, your actionable ideas, and your evidence about transforming from, traditional hierarchies to knowledge-powered networks. Folks, if your organization would like to learn more about implementing, network structures and/or curated insights, we're making ourselves available for no-charge 30-minute, sort of conversations. When we send the presentation deck to you, there will be a calendar link you can click on to book a time slot with us if you wish. No risk, no obligation, no expectation, just an opportunity to chat and kick the tires on this. If you would like to learn more about what your expectations of your employees will be as they become subject matter experts in your organizations, over the coming months here, then you'll want to dial in and talk to us on November 15th for our next webinar. Sylvie, I know we're at the top of the hour. I'm missing the opportunity for Q&A from the folks here. If anyone's hanging around to ask, we're hanging around to answer. If folks have to drop off, you can get the questions to us and we'll be sure to address them. Might have lost Sylvie.
Thank you. No, you didn't lose me. I just had to unmute myself. So thank you very much to our panel today, Lacey Lowe, Bob Dana, John Burge, and Bob Sachs. And thank you for the very informative webcast today. Lots of content there. And a few reminders for the attendees. If you'd like to view this webcast again, the archive recording and slides will be available for up to 7 days for our free members. And of course, if you have a certification membership, you can view it forever. All webcast credits are stored in your HR.com account. Watch for your HR.com email to arrive within 1 to 2 business days. It will contain your certification credit information. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment to fill out the exit survey that will appear on your screen once the webcast is ended. That's also another place that you can submit questions if you think of something after the webcast has shut down. And this does conclude our webcast, so enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for attending.